Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Simon Wall, the CEO of B'nai B'rith Canada, and I'm joined today with Richard Robertson, our Director of Research and Advocacy at B'nai B'rith Canada as well. Nice to see you, Rich.
Thank you for meeting with me today, Simon.
I think it's important that we explain a little bit about B'nai B'rith Canada's annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, the relevance of it, a little bit about the history, and then we can dive into some discussion, if that's okay, around some of the topics and relevance of the 2025 audit.
Sounds good to me. So B'nai B'rith Canada's audit is something that the organization has been producing since 1981, and it's really become the seminal document in Canada for assessing the state of anti-Semitism in a given year. The audit is utilized by police forces, by government at all levels, and by stakeholders around the world to help inform policy and decision-making surrounding the combating of anti-Semitism and the protecting of Jewish life in Canada.
And the headline this year is that there have been 6,800 incidents in 2025. So when we hear that number and start to understand what that really means in terms of lived experiences, what does that actually tell us about the state of anti-Semitism in Canada today?
The Jewish community is in a crisis of anti-Semitism. The situation of anti-Semitism in Canada has sadly been deteriorating since the October 7th conflict. Anti-Semitic incidents have risen by over 160% since 2022, and it's having a monumentally diabolical impact on Canadian life. There's not a Jew in Canada that hasn't had their life impacted by this current state of anti-Semitism. It's a 9% increase over last year, and this is a sign of a worsening trend, unfortunately, one that must be dealt with.
Some people who are not interested in the numbers alone may actually want to understand more about the impact, what it means on the ground, what that actually means to the average Jewish person, but also big picture, where are we on Canadian values overall? So if I tie back into what you were mentioning about some of the trends, I'm looking at the numbers. In 2022, incidents recorded in the audit were at 2,769. And now we're talking about 6,800 incidents. And that is a tremendously large increase. So what does that trajectory tell us as a society about where things are actually heading right now?
Well, if you boil it down to the individual impact on Jewish people, it's over 18 incidents of anti-Semitism a day. That means that on any given day, 18 Jewish persons across Canada are experiencing anti-Semitism. The effects of that cannot be accurately quantified in the numbers.
Well, when we look at the audit year over year over year over year, we start to very clearly identify with total and complete absolute clarity that the trends have continued year over year over year over year as we progress. So are we really looking at what we need to call a new baseline for anti-Semitism in Canada?
Certainly, I think the new baseline was established in 2023, and sadly, we've seen a 7% increase, and then now we saw a 9% increase. And so when you have a new baseline, and that new baseline is grotesquely unacceptable, and yet there's increases upon that, the alarm bells must be going off. We need action now to fight anti-Semitism. This is not something that can be delayed. This audit must serve as an immediate warning call for all Canadians. Our leaders must understand that the new normal is worsening, not getting better.
Right. So interestingly, in order to understand where to put focus on taking action, these results, the data within the annual audit for 2025, actually show some really fascinating and alarming insights into where the areas of focus need to be. And when I look at the detail of that, for example, prior to October 7th, incidents tied to online harassment tended to hover around the mid 70% range of the totality of the incidents. But when we look at the 2025 audit numbers, online harassment now accounts for about 92% of the identified incidents in 2025. So with that reality and the shift that's taking place there, which is quite dramatic and significant, what does that actually mean in practice for how Jewish Canadians are experiencing anti-Semitism right now?
Anti-Semitism is being experienced by Canadian Jews online, but it doesn't stay online. The 10 incidents of violence, the hundreds of incidents of harassment, and the hundreds of incidents of vandalism recorded in this year's audit are a direct symptom of the manifestations of anti-Semitism that we are seeing online. The online realm is the breeding ground now for anti-Semitism in Canada. What used to be spread through postering, what used to be spread through dialogue in the streets, is now being spread at a vicious, unprecedented rate online, and it's compromising Jewish life. It's never been easier, dare I say, in the history of humankind to target a Jewish person with hate. All you have to do is open up your smartphone or log onto your computer and sit behind your keyboard, and you can do almost irreparable damage. And that's what we're seeing happening with frightening frequency right across the country.
If we look at what you just said and we look at the year as a whole, we actually saw a progression of an increasing amount of incidents throughout the 2025 year, with actually the worst point in that year being the last quarter, and in particular in December, amplified by the Hanukkah shootings in Sydney. So do you think that there is data to support that what happens on foreign soil in terms of anti-Semitic incidents and the Jew hatred that we are seeing around the world impacts here domestically in Canada in terms of the Jewish experience?
Absolutely. We saw it in Audit's past when there was conflict between Israel and Hamas, when there was conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. We would see upticks specifically in online discourse, anti-Semitic online discourse here in Canada. This year, we saw a notable increase following the 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel in July and August. We also saw, as you mentioned, a tremendous increase, a really unfortunate increase after the Bondi Beach terror attack. We saw an increase also, though, in November, which is interesting to note. There was a significant amount of domestic division noted online in November. There was a tremendous amount of white nationalist activity, and that fostered anti-Semitic online discourse as well. So yes, year over year, we are seeing that when things happen abroad, Jewish Canadians play the brunt, but it's not the sole rationale behind the anti-Semitism that we are seeing. There are domestic drivers of anti-Semitism. Another thing to note, though, is how some of the upticks in online anti-Semitism that we see can be viewed as a precursor for the anti-Semitism that we see on the streets. And now it's not captured in this 2026 audit, but it should be of no surprise to anyone listening that we saw an increase, a dramatic increase in online vitriol, anti-Semitic hate speech in the late months of 2025. And then in 2026, we've already noted an increase in attacks like the shootings that have really held this community hostage in recent months and weeks.
So if we look even further beyond the specific data in the report, there's been a lot of talk and incidents on campuses and in schools across the country. Are you able to talk about where we've identified some of the most specific or deepest impact in those spaces on Jewish life?
Absolutely. It's unfortunate, and we do delve into it in this year's audit in the Beyond the Numbers section, but we hear on a daily basis from students and from parents and from concerned citizens about the impact that anti-Semitism is having on our campuses and in our schools. Parents no longer feel comfortable sending their kids to public school for fear that they will be persecuted because of their religion. Students on campuses are questioning their choice of university as a result of the anti-Semitism that they are facing. Specifically at the university level, it's become quite systemic.
Well, let's talk about the word Zionist for a minute, because that has been playing a really important role in the dynamic of Jewish life in Canada. So even just there's a volume of information inside the report where there's a discussion on the demonization of Zionism. Also understanding the connection between that demonization of Zionism to real world events. Are you able to speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Zionist has become a dog whistle for Jew. And it's one that is being utilized right across the ideological spectrum. We see it used in instances of right-wing hate. We see it used in instances of left-wing hate. And we see it used in instances of, for instance, Islamist hate. And the troubling thing about that is that if you look at that collectively, Jews who support the existence of a state of Israel, Jews who hold Zionist beliefs, which is a core tenet of the Jewish faith, are being excluded from society. In many of the instances that we go into in our special report on the demonization of Zionists, one thing is made clear. In some of these circles, it's okay to be a Jew, as long as you're a Jew on certain terms. You have to be a Jew by somebody else's standard, not by your own standard. And that is absolutely unacceptable. Jewish people deserve, like all other people, to be treated as their full selves. And if a Jew is a Zionist, if a Jew believes in the state of Israel and their ancestral homeland, then they should be accepted within society. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing ostracization, marginalization, exclusion in a systemic manner.
When you say in a systemic manner, what is that for you?
Well, we do a great job of highlighting that in this year's audit. It means that if you're a Jew who believes in the state of Israel, or that the state of Israel has a right to exist, you're not welcome in certain clubs on campuses. You might face backlash in your workplace. You might be called out on the schoolyard. You might face persecution from your teachers or from your professors. Even our government has taken positions, and governments across the country, I should say, have taken positions that lend to the exclusion of Jews who harbor certain beliefs. And I want to go back to Zionism being a dog whistle. This is hatred. This is anti-Semitism. When you isolate and when you target somebody for a component of their beliefs, a core tenet of their faith, that is hatred. That is hatred under any definition in Canada. And yet there are those who are trying to obfuscate their hatred and justify their hatred by playing semantics. And that is something as a society that we need to acknowledge and that we need to overcome. It is not acceptable. If you are simply replacing the word Jew with the word Zionist, then you are still engaging in the same form of anti-Semitism as if you hadn't gotten into the word salad.
So let's talk about that, because I think there are some people who would say, well, that might be your opinion, but I have a different opinion. So is there an objective standard that you can explain that would help people also understand the standards and the methodology that are relied upon in the audit itself?
Absolutely. We use the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. This is a definition of anti-Semitism that has been adopted by the majority of Canadian provinces and by our federal government. It's also been adopted by over 40 countries around the world in leading institutions, including post-secondary thought leaders right around the world. And the IRA is meant to be a guide. So the IRA contains 11 illustrative examples. Why is this important in the context of our audit? Because you can cross-reference instances against the 11 illustrative examples and get a good sense of whether or not that is the issue in question is anti-Semitic. So when we talk about Zionism or criticism of Zionism, criticizing the state of Israel or the leadership of the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. But when you start to engage in rhetoric that involves Israel, the Jewish people, Zionism, in a way that creates a double standard, or in a way in which you wouldn't necessarily impart the same logic on any other minority, then you're crossing the threshold into anti-Semitism. And that's what the IRA definition does, is it outlines contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. Of course, there are your traditional forms of anti-Semitism, your various forms of libel, your idea that Jews are responsible for societal ills, that the Jews killed Jesus Christ, etc., etc. So we have the modern forms of anti-Semitism as well. And so what the IRA does is it takes into account the old traditional forms of anti-Semitism and the new forms of anti-Semitism. And those new forms of anti-Semitism include some instances of anti-Semitism that involve using Zionism in a way that manifests as anti-Semitism.
Can you speak more about the reporting mechanisms?
Absolutely. So we have a hotline, which we operate 24/7. We have an app-based reporting mechanism that you can download on your phone. And we also have a web form. You can access our website and report incidents of anti-Semitism. We receive this information anonymously, and we actuate on every single incident or report, I should say, that comes into us.
And I understand that this audit, of course, is speaking specifically to anti-Semitic incidents that have been identified after following through with the methodology as described in the report itself. With that said, do you also get reports of hate or hate incidents that are not connected to the Jewish community?
Yes, we do. It's one of the byproducts of operating an anti-hate hotline and anti-hate reporting mechanisms. And when we do, we have a system in place. We ensure that those incidents of hate are passed on to the appropriate individuals if they are beyond the expertise of B'nai B'rith Canada. We also use those incidents of hate to advance our advocacy initiatives. We're not only receiving information and actuating on that information, but we go the extra mile. Our advocacy is centered on results and achieving results. And so if we see a trend in hate generally, for instance, like the trend in online hate, not just against the Jewish community, but against all vulnerable communities in Canada, then we will use the information that we receive, whether or not it's specifically about an incident of anti-Semitism or about hate writ large, and that will help us to inform our submissions to government. It will help us inform our efforts to change legislation and to change policy to protect against all forms of hatred. So there is no bad information. What we need from society is we need them to understand that B'nai B'rith Canada is here to help drive change, to protect Canadian values, and to make this country a better place. So whether or not you're a Jewish individual, or whether or not you're somebody who has just experienced hate or has experienced ostracization and marginalization, we want to hear from you because we can actuate on that. We can take your complaint and give substance to it.
So what does it mean to act on every report?
Sometimes it's as simple as following up and making sure that the individual is heard and that they have the supports that they need. Other times it's about ensuring that the incidents are properly recorded so they go into our audit. Sometimes it's liaising with law enforcement or liaising with a professional body to ensure that somebody has been held accountable for their hatred. And other times it's about forming those larger narratives that then help drive our advocacy around changing policy and changing legislation.
So if someone were living as a Canadian but not involved in this active fight that you and other people at B'nai B'rith Canada live in every single moment of every single day, how would you explain the moving the needle effect of B'nai B'rith Canada? What actually has happened because of the work that's been done from results of incidents, reports, and really what is captured in this tip of the iceberg?
The work that we do at B'nai B'rith Canada, I want to take us back to the iceberg once again, because I think that this is really appropriate. Chunks break off of an iceberg. And so if we have the work that we're doing, receiving incidents, triaging them, understanding them, that's the main body of our iceberg. Our audit's our tip. But every now and then, chunks break off of this that have their own momentum. And what that looks like in the course of any given year is working on legislation, like Bill C-9, for instance, having terrorist organizations listed, like MKY and 764, holding individuals accountable and having charges laid against hate mongers, like, for instance, Brandon Taylor Moore. And this is just a snapshot of the work that we are doing. Because we have our finger on the pulse, because we understand the landscape of hate in Canada, we are able to contribute to fighting for Canadian values and protecting Canadian society in a myriad of ways, working with Parliament, working with municipal governments, working with law enforcement, working with universities to ensure that they are advancing their policies in ways that protect the Jewish community and others. This is what we do at B'nai B'rith Canada.
And in addition to all of the advocacy work and capturing the reporting and translating that into meaningful data that can help to inform policymakers, law enforcement agencies, etc., B'nai B'rith Canada also does a lot of other work for the community. And I think it's important that we talk about that too, even though that's not what's being highlighted in this conversation today. I know that B'nai B'rith Canada has been a leader in a lot of the social services, providing affordable housing to seniors, to new immigrant families, to having programs that really across the country that have opportunities to provide clothing to those in need. We have thrift stores and pop-up shops and winter clothing drives and summer clothing drives. We work with new immigrant agencies to try to help people integrate into Canadian life. We have sports programs and cultural opportunities. Tell us more about what you think people would want to hear about when they think of B'nai B'rith Canada.
Well, what you just mentioned is actually what makes me so proud to be a part of B'nai B'rith Canada. I know it's the same for you, and it's just that we do so much as an organization. And it's really, truly, for me, the embodiment of what it means to be a grassroots organization. B'nai B'rith, from the outset, has had its pillars: advocacy, community, sports, and social engagement. And we've never shied away from that. And we continue to adhere to those pillars. And we do so at a grassroots level, as you mentioned, supporting those in need through the food bank, through the pop-up shops, through engagement with other communities, providing sports and social interaction to Canadians, and aspiring to have advocacy that provides meaningful change at all levels, but at its foundation is rooted in the grassroots. And so that's what I think people need to understand more about B'nai B'rith Canada. For 150 years, B'nai B'rith Canada has been at the forefront of providing for the Jewish community and for Canadian society in a larger sense at that grassroots level. We are people helping people, and we live by that motto every single day.
There is a global pandemic of hate that is happening right now. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this audit is being released just at the start of the second quarter of 2026, even though it's capturing all of the data from 2025. So are there any trends that are identified in the 2025 audit that have already been either reinforced, come to fruition, or had some predictable results in this first quarter of 2026?
Yeah, I think we touched on it earlier, but I think it's worth re-emphasizing. And that's that if you look at the online hate in particular and the uptick in online hate towards the end of the year, and then you look at some of what we've seen even anecdotally in 2026, the shootings at Jewish-owned businesses, the shootings at Jewish institutions, at synagogues, at houses of worship, that doesn't occur in a vacuum. When hate is allowed to percolate online, when hate online is allowed to spread without consequence, it emboldens, it incites, and it should be viewed as a direct precursor to what then plays out on our streets. And this is a lesson that we can learn from the data in our audit. And it goes back to what we were talking about with the hate online really being the next frontier in this fight for our collective society. If we don't get a handle on that, we will continue to see those who are indoctrinated online, who are then playing out their hate in real time, and it will cost us lives. And that is something that we have to get ahead of. This audit must be an example of what we cannot tolerate in society. And what we cannot tolerate is the open exportation of hate in the online realm, because it does have real world repercussions.
And these are some of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years, whether it's things that began only as words, then moving into firebombing buildings, whether moving into assaults of people in different cities across the country, most recently with the shootings, as you mentioned. When we allow the online hate to continue, we know that unchecked, that only has one place it can go, and that is to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And we need to take the steps that are necessary to prevent those bullets into buildings from becoming bullets into bodies. And I think that the conclusions in the audit are alarming, are concerning, are very relevant in terms of helping readers understand where the prioritization needs to lie now. And do you have any thoughts on where you see B'nai B'rith going as we head into the rest of 2026?
Well, I think we perhaps more than most understand the nature of contemporary hate and contemporary anti-Semitism, and we will continue to fight it where it needs to be fought, and that's on this online battleground. We will continue to ensure that those who allow hate to be spread on their platforms and those who allow this country in its digital realm to be a cesspool for hate are held accountable. We also go after those propagating the hate online. We won't stop. We're going to take on everyone because this is a fight worth fighting.
So given what the report shows, what is B'nai B'rith Canada actually doing to try to reverse these trends?
Well, we're involved in a myriad of ways trying to move the needle, so to speak. One of them is through our legislative advocacy, and this is something that we're involved in at all levels of government. At the federal level, we've been involved in Bill C-9, working to amend Canada's criminal code to ensure that there is more of a focus and more of a contemporaneously relevant focus on hate crimes. We are working at the provincial level in Quebec on Bill 9 to make sure that new legislation in Quebec doesn't unduly impact the lives of Jewish Quebecers and others. We're also working at the municipal level. We've been engaged in the fight to have vulnerable infrastructure legislation right across the country. We also do a lot of grassroots mobilization, letter writing campaigns, like the 22,000 people who reached out to B'nai B'rith, or who joined, sorry, I should say, the letter writing campaign to have the Muslim Brotherhood listed as a terrorist entity in this country. We have mobilized Pro Bono Council who are fighting tooth and nail to have Canada's Holocaust records and evidence of our Nazi past disclosed to the public so that we can learn from it. We also lead the charge when it comes to petitions, like our petition to have Samadoun, which is a listed terrorist entity's corporate status revoked. This was a grassroots initiative and one that has finally come to fruition, as Samadoun is no longer both a listed terrorist entity and a not-for-profit corporation in this country. We also, when necessary, engage in litigation. B'nai B'rith is leading the support for a class action lawsuit at McGill University, one that will hopefully have a precedent that can be replicated around the country, which is that when universities fail to protect their Jewish students, because all members of a university's campus community deserve to feel safe on campus, that they are held accountable. We've also engaged in a judicial review. B'nai B'rith Canada is fighting a challenge to ensure that organizations like ours are able to serve as complainants in complaints against professional bodies so that we can properly represent the community that we're mandated to represent. We also are constantly engaging in policy reform, making submissions to government. In the past year, we've made submissions to government committees related to social media and its impact on youth, which spurned our call for a national youth digital literacy campaign. We've also made submissions to government about how our immigration laws can be reformed to help protect Canadians against indoctrination, radicalization, and extremism. We've made further submissions like the one that hopefully won't just lead to Samadoun's dissolution, but will actually change our laws so that terrorist organizations can no longer coexist at the same time as corporations. These are just a few examples of what we're doing. Our work goes really into all facets of life, including working with police and law enforcement to help change their policies to ensure that they're responding to hate crimes in a meaningful and tangible way, and one that really understands the sensitivities of handling anti-Semitic crime.
And where do you think the role of B'nai B'rith Canada fits into the landscape of work being done by other advocacy agencies in the country?
Like-minded organizations at this perilous time, when we are facing a tsunami of hate, as some have called it, and increases in division, must come together. We are constantly leading an effort to bring together organizations like B'nai B'rith Canada from all backgrounds who are fighting for Canadian values and to protect the Canadian way of life and to ensure that everyone in this country has the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, something that I've said a few times is that we can't protect hate in the name of liberty. We have to actually protect liberty by combating hate. And I hope that the lessons learned from the audit will help to put our priorities in the right place at all levels, institutions, government, agencies, etc., across the country.
Well, I really don't think that I can even follow it up. I think that that's so perfect. So. Thank you so much to everyone who spoke up and contributed to this year's audit by reporting incidents of hate to our hotline, to our app, and to our web form. Our audit would not be the accurate snapshot of the state of hate and anti-Semitism in Canada that it is without your support. Please, if you are the victim of hate, if you're the victim of anti-Semitism, reach out to B'nai B'rith Canada using the link below. We are here to help. And to all those listening, this audit represents the state of anti-Semitism in Canada. It is worth your attention. Please utilize the link below to view our audit, engage with it, discuss it. Make sure that anti-Semitism in the state of hate, the perilous position that Jewish Canadians presently find themselves in, is a part of the discussion and that it isn't ignored.
Follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter through our website to continue to see how we here at B'nai B'rith Canada continue to move the needle in the fight against anti-Semitism in Canada and beyond.